I didn't mean to notice her at first. The cafe was quiet mid-morning, and I was mostly trying to remember whether I'd left the stove on. My order, black coffee, no sugar, was exactly the same as the last 3 mornings, yet somehow it tasted different when she walked in. She wore a dark coat, slightly rumpled, sleeves pushed up like she'd been washing something, or fixing something. I caught the edge of leather gloves dangling from one hand, one slipping off as she moved. Mechanic's gloves, I realized too late to look away. The other hand went to catch it, but she didn't quite. You'll need a napkin for that, I said, holding mine out without thinking. She glanced at me, a half smile, and it was gone before I could really register it. Thanks, she said, voice low, careful. Her eyes flicked to my coffee as if she was reading something in it, but not the usual stuff. Something else. She sat 2 tables over, unpacked a notebook, and I found myself noticing how she smoothed the page before writing, how her pen paused over letters, how her hair caught the sunlight like it was supposed to. I turned back to my cup and realized I'd been staring. My thumb traced the rim absently. I wanted to ask her something, anything, a comment on the weather, the coffee, the way the steam moved off my cup, but my mouth went dry, my words flat. I remembered she'd brushed off the glove again, this time for good. I should have offered to help, or asked her why she wore gloves in October. Instead, I watched, hoping she didn't notice me noticing. She laughed quietly at something in her notebook. Not a big laugh, a little exhale that made the corner of her mouth twitch. And I noticed how she sometimes rubbed the inside of her wrist, maybe from nerves, maybe habit. The tiny, human things. I texted someone, then paused mid-typing. The message went unsent, another unsent one, and I realized that's been my rhythm lately, typing, pausing, letting things float in the drafts folder. Half finished thoughts, paused feelings, little hesitations I never meant to be permanent. When she got up to leave, she brushed off crumbs from her coat. I wanted to say something, I wanted to offer my hand as a casual, see you, but I just nodded. She noticed, maybe, because she flicked her eyes toward me for a second longer than necessary, just that fraction too long, and my stomach twisted. Outside, the door jingled, the sound stretching in the quiet. I could see her walking down the street, coat collar up, hair catching light. I felt like I'd forgotten to breathe properly for a minute. Then my phone buzzed. I hadn't expected anything. Not from her. Not yet. A messagey, "Did you leave your wallet here?" I blinked. My thumb hovered over the screen. A wave of something, surprise, excitement, the kind that made your chest press against your ribs, ran through me. And I realized that maybe the first thing I noticed wasn't her gloves. It was that she had let something slip, just slightly. And now, I wasn't sure if I wanted to return the wallet, or if I wanted to follow her down the street, and see what she did next. I stared at the message again, and for the first time that morning, I didn't pause. I found her the next day at the bookstore, tucked into a corner by the philosophy section. I wasn't sure if I had the right person until she looked up, and her eyes caught mine. That same flicker, quiet, almost imperceptible, like the gloves had never fully left her hand. "Hey," I said, fumbling with the strap of my backpack. "Hey," she replied. A pause. "You always come here." "Sometimes," I said. I wanted to add, "only when you're not here," but didn't. The words stuck somewhere behind my teeth. We ended up standing by the counter, sipping tea she insisted I try. Green tea. Too bitter for me, but she laughed when I made a face, a short exhale that turned into a tiny grin. "You always drink it like that?" she asked, tilting her head. "Like what?" "Like you're bracing yourself," she said, soft, almost a tease. I shrugged, smiled faintly. "Guess I am." There was a pause. Comfortable enough that it could have been silence, uncomfortable enough that it felt like an invitation. I watched her hands wrap around the cup, noticing the calluses at the edge of her palms. I wondered what they'd done, where she'd worked, what she'd lost. "I used to do pottery," she said suddenly, like the thought had just rolled off her tongue. "Years ago. My ex, he hated the mess." She laughed a little, but it didn't reach her eyes entirely. "I liked it. The way clay stuck to your hands and you forgot about everything else." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask more about him, about the divorce, about the gloves she sometimes still wore, but I stayed quiet. Just nodded. Because I was imagining scenarios I wasn't supposed to imagine. Long afternoons where she'd laugh at my bad jokes, evenings where I'd help her wash dishes, the subtle shift when she let her guard down. And I knew it was risky. Too obvious in the back of my mind. I was 25, she was 45, divorced, maybe looking for something she couldn't name, maybe looking for someone she shouldn't. We lingered by the tea cart. I offered to refill her cup, my hand brushing hers for the briefest second, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at me, just long enough for a shiver to settle somewhere behind my ribs. "Thanks," she said, voice quieter this time, almost private. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. We sat at the table, silence stretching comfortably, punctuated by the occasional sip and the shuffle of pages from nearby readers. When she stood to leave, she caught my gaze and held it for a fraction too long. The corner of her mouth quirked, and the light in her eyes felt like acknowledgement. Not exactly permission, not exactly warning. Something in between. I watched her go and thought about how the small gestures, the touch, the smile, the remembered drink preference, had piled up quietly. How a few minutes could feel like a lifetime if someone finally noticed the way you existed in the world. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. This part adds a small personal truth: pottery, divorce, quietly risky connection, age gap, life circumstances, internal conflict, and imagined scenarios, emotional tension via micro moments, tea touch, gazy, reflective pivot line ending on a lingering, intimate note. The library smelled like polished wood and dust, the afternoon sunlight streaking through the tall windows. I found her between the history and literature stacks, kneeling to reach for a book on the bottom shelf. "You're always in the quietest spots," I said, voice lower than I meant. She straightened, book in hand, glancing at me. Her gloves were gone today, hands bare, fingers flexing as she held the spine. Something about the gesture made my stomach clench. "I like to hear my own thoughts," she said, a little smile tugging at her lips. "And avoid people like you." I laughed, but it was short, nervous. She noticed. I could see it in the tilt of her head, the way her eyes lingered too long. We walked toward the reading tables, silent mostly, though there were words left unsaid between us. I offered to carry her books. She waved me off, then paused, letting me take just one. My hand brushed hers briefly, warm, deliberate, but fleeting. I wanted to linger. I wanted to ask, "Do you want me to stay?" But the words stuck in my throat. She sat, arranging her books neatly, the faint crease between her brows betraying her concentration. I imagined her thinking about something else entirely. Maybe me, maybe something she shouldn't. My chest tightened. "You always notice the small things," she said suddenly, picking at a loose thread on her sweater. "Even when I don't want you to." I froze. Should I say it? Could I say it? Instead, I nodded, blinking, pretending to scan the titles in front of me. My fingers itched to reach for her hand. Not for comfort, not for anything bold, but to feel the connection, however brief. Then a noise. A friend of hers from a nearby table looked up and waved, oblivious. She stiffened slightly, shifted in her seat. A subtle retreat. Just enough to remind me that maybe I was reading too much into things, or maybe not enough. I let my eyes drift away, thinking about the quiet rhythm of this, the hesitation, the almost but not quite. She picked up her pen and tapped it against her notebook, a subtle metronome of tension. I wanted to lean over, to say something, anything, but the pause stretched too long, and then she looked at me, full eyes, not fleeting this time. Something unspoken hovered between us, almost touchable. My breath hitched. I could almost. Her hand moved, brushing against mine as she reached for her cup. Not a reach to make contact, not a push away. Just a grazing. And the air between us seemed to hum. I wanted to say it. The words, "I like you more than I should," hovered on the tip of my tongue. But they stayed there. Her gaze flicked away, toward the window, toward anything else. I swallowed, my hand still hovering near hers. We sat in silence, the library clock ticking, the books between us like a fragile wall, and for a moment, just a breath, a heartbeat, it felt like we could collapse the distance, that something might happen. But it didn't. Not yet. This part highlights emotional stakes rising through hesitation and small gestures, resistance and pullback via body language. Not words, external complication, friend noticing, nearly crossing the line, almost confession, grazing hands, a fragmented, internal POV emphasizing quiet tension. The park was nearly empty, late afternoon sun filtering through the maple leaves. I followed her slowly, hands stuffed in my jacket pockets. The air smelled faintly of wet grass and coffee from earlier. "You're quiet today," she said, glancing at me from the bench she'd already chosen. She tugged her coat tighter around her shoulders, even though it wasn't that cold. "Just thinking," I said, though I wasn't sure what I meant. My gaze kept drifting to the way her fingers drummed lightly on the bench, the small movements that felt like nervous energy. She shifted closer, not enough to cross any obvious line, but enough that my shoulder brushed hers. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, or maybe it was just her. My chest tightened. "I saw someone today," she said, voice low. "An old friend." "Hey, noticed you too." I frowned, unsure what she meant. "Noticed me?" Her gaze flicked away. "You're different. Easier to talk to than most." He said something about it. Made me realize how unusual this is. The words lingered in the space between us. Unspoken, this was not nothing. She could have laughed it off, but she didn't. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and looked down, a small crease between her brows. I wanted to say no, to ask, "Do you feel it too, or am I imagining it?" But my throat went dry. My hands itched to reach for hers, to hold on to the moment, but I didn't. Instead, I fiddled with the zipper on my jacket, the motion awkward, anxious. "I don't know why I let things get like this," she said suddenly, voice barely above the rustle of leaves. "I mean, you. It's complicated, and I shouldn't." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Complicated how?" I asked, soft, careful. She looked up, eyes meeting mine fully for the first time today. "Because I'm 45, she said, almost a whisper, "and you're not. And I've been divorced. And it feels like, I don't know." She laughed, a short, raw exhale. "I don't know." I leaned closer, almost too close, careful not to cross whatever invisible line had formed. The sunlight gloated off the hair at the nape of her neck. I wanted to reach out, to tell her, "I feel the same, I shouldn't, but I do." Instead, I just said, "I don't know either." We sat in silence, the kind that is loud if you're listening too closely. My fingers twitched against my knees. Her hand shifted slightly on the bench. The space between us felt smaller, somehow, and then she smiled. Not the casual one from the cafe or bookstore. This one was fragile, almost hesitant, like a window cracked open. "I shouldn't ask this," she said. Her voice trembled just enough to make my heart catch. "But do you ever think about—" She paused, letting the words hang. Her eyes flicked toward mine, searching, questioning, daring me to answer. I wanted to lean in, I wanted to finish the sentence for her. But instead, I just exhaled, letting the question float between us like smoke. Highlights in this part: emotional peak through jealousy, guilt, and fear of losing control, quiet intimacy in a shared, ordinary moment, park bench, raw confession of boundaries and hesitation, pauses. Body language, micro movements convey tension, ends on an unspoken question, keeping the moment unresolved. I didn't see her the next week. Not at the cafe, not at the bookstore, not even in the park where we'd walked. I kept my routine the same, hoping maybe she'd appear, but the empty chairs and quiet tables felt heavier. When I finally did see her, it was from across the street, outside a small gallery. She was talking to someone, a man older than me, familiar in some way I didn't know. She laughed, but it wasn't the same laugh. It didn't reach her eyes the way it did when we shared a quiet joke. I thought about crossing, calling out, waving, but something in her posture, the way she held her bag close, shoulders tense, made me pause. Maybe it wasn't my place. The next day, a message waited on my phone, unsent. I had typed, "I've missed seeing you. Are you okay?" I stared at it for minutes, fingers hovering over the send button, then deleted it. Later, I learned from a mutual friend that she had a child. Not something she'd mentioned, not something I'd asked. Just a part of her life I hadn't known. And suddenly the pieces of her careful distance made sense. Or maybe they didn't. I caught glimpses of her afterward, walking quickly past the cafe, leaving with her gloves clutched in her hands, avoiding the tables we used to share. My chest tightened each time. I imagined explanations. Maybe she felt guilty, maybe afraid, maybe like she'd let something slip she shouldn't. I found myself writing drafts in my head, conversations that never happened. I rehearsed apologies, jokes, confessions. I imagined running after her, asking her to sit, to talk, to anything. But I didn't. The park bench we once shared sat empty. I passed it every day on my way home, glancing at it like it held a secret, like it could tell me what went wrong if only I listened closely enough. Her absence felt like punctuation in my life. Not an ending, not a beginning, just a comma. I waited for signs, small or obvious, and yet she didn't return the way she had before. One afternoon, I opened my phone again. Another message unsent. Do you want to meet? My thumb hovered over send, then slid away. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence, and maybe that was the point. Maybe the story was never meant to resolve neatly. I left the chair across from me empty that night, leaving space for someone who might not come back. I walked past the cafe once more, glancing at the table we used to share, a coffee cup, cold, abandoned. A flicker of her hand reaching for the rim. A thought I couldn't place if I had just said something, but the words stayed in my head. Unsent. Highlights in this part: complications, sudden pullback, presence of child, hinted emotional whiplash, hope, confusion, withdrawal, ambiguity maintained, no resolution, micro behaviors show emotional tension, empty chairs, unsent texts, glances, reflective pivot line. I didn't feel heartbroken, I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I found her in her kitchen that evening, standing by the counter with a mug in her hands. Steam rose in lazy curls, curling around her fingers. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I couldn't place the right words. The silence stretched, full of all the things neither of us had said. You came, she said finally, voice low, cautious. I wasn't sure if I should, I admitted, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. My fingers brushed the edge of the countertop, warm, solid, real. She smiled faintly, the kind of small smile that holds both amusement and exhaustion. I wasn't sure either, she said. She set her mug down and ran a hand along the counter, smoothing the wood absent-mindedly. We stood there, neither speaking, both listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft drip of the tap. My chest tightened, every pulse a reminder of the weeks of pauses, half-sent messages, and imagined conversations. I didn't tell you everything, she said finally, about my son, about why I sometimes step back, why I have to be careful. Her words hovered, almost unfinished, like she didn't quite trust them to exist fully in the air. I nodded, wanting to say I know. I've guessed. I've felt it anyway. But the words felt too loud, too permanent. Instead, I moved a step closer, careful, deliberate, giving her space but closing enough distance to feel her presence. I've thought about a lot of things, I said, voice low, hesitant. About you. About this. I stopped, unsure if the next words were permission or a trespass. She reached out first, lightly, brushing her fingers against mine as she picked up her mug again. Not holding it, not pulling away. Just a touch. I exhaled without realizing it. Okay, I said, quiet. Simple. No promises, no declarations, just acknowledgement. Her eyes soft smile. Okay, she said back. We stood like that, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's hands, far enough to leave room for the rest. I didn't know what would come next. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something unguarded. Something unspoken but shared. She tilted her head, looking at me with a brief, careful curiosity. I noticed the small line at the corner of her mouth, the way her fingers lingered over the mug. I realized that this quiet, fragile connection, the brush of skin, the soft exchange of okay, was all we needed for now. No dramatic confessions, no sweeping gestures, just presence, just acknowledgement, just the small, human choice to be there, together, if only for a moment. And in that silence, I understood the cost of being this close was high, but the cost of staying away was higher. We didn't speak again that night. We didn't need to. The touch, the glance, the quiet okay was enough. Highlights in this part: quiet emotional climax in an intimate, domestic setting, choice to speak or stay silent, to risk vulnerability, subtle gestures convey connection, touch, glance, shared acknowledgement, emotional cost of closeness emphasized without melodrama, ends on a simple, human moment instead of a cliché. Resolute. Weeks passed. Months, almost imperceptibly. The cafe still opened at 8:47 a.m., the same clock above the counter ticking steadily. I got my usual black coffee, she always had green tea. We didn't rush. We didn't announce anything. We simply fell into a quiet rhythm, shared benches in the park, small jokes over forgotten books, A glance that lingered just long enough. Some days, she brought gloves. Some days, she didn't. I didn't ask why. It didn't matter. I remembered the first time we brushed hands in the bookstore, the near confession on the park bench, the silence in her kitchen. Those moments weren't dramatic, they weren't cinematic in the obvious way. But they built this, whatever this was, a familiarity, a comfort, a choice to show up again and again, quietly. Her son sometimes tagged along to the cafe, a small, polite presence I learned to navigate. I never overstepped. She never needed to explain. Boundaries had become a language we both understood without words. We even revisited the bench. The one in the park where almost everything had started. Leaves had fallen, then grown back. We sat together, side by side, and I realized I looking at the world differently because she was there. I was looking at her differently. Not in longing, not in hesitation, but in the simple way you notice someone you care about without needing to claim them. The coffee mugs were chipped now. The teacups had new cracks, a napkin folded just so on the table. Small rituals, tiny human things. One morning, she laughed at something I didn't even remember saying. The sound slipped into the space between us, as natural as the sun slipping through the window. I reached across, lightly, fingers brushing hers. No hesitation, no question, just presence. I noticed how she'd stop mid-step sometimes, glancing at the street we walked together. And I noticed how I didn't have to explain myself anymore. My pauses, my awkward phrases, my tendency to overthink. She understood, we both did. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a storybook. The apartment needed cleaning. Work piled up. Life's small disruptions arrived on schedule. But we showed up. And that, I realized, was the quietest kind of love, the earned kind. I sipped my black coffee, she sipped her green tea, and the sun hit the corner of the cafe just right. The world went on. And yet in this tiny ordinary moment everything felt as it should. Later I found her looking at me, a half smile, half question, the kind that needed no words. I returned it with the same expression. That small exchange, our own language, was enough. And I thought finally, quietly, as if only she could hear it, I'm glad the gloves came off. Highlights in this part: gentle, earned resolution. Life is realistic, grounded callbacks to key objects, times, and moments. Bench, 8:47 a.m. tea, coffee. Love shown through routines, gestures, understanding, not declarations. Ends with intimate reflection. Q-taco style engagement close to call to action. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next? Moments where emotions are small, honest, and quietly devastating or hopeful.